my general thoughts on Nuno, and I think, Charlie, this is something which you did a good piece on this last week. It's like, he's a really good manager. Like, he's clearly done very well at Wolves. But I think obviously there's a big lack of enthusiasm, or maybe that's unfair. There's a bit of a lack of enthusiasm about his appointment at Tottenham, simply because, you know, he's coming after 10 weeks of managerial search in which they've spoken to more than 10 other people, and also during which, when Nuno initially left Wolves at the end of May, Tottenham ruled him out, saying that his style of football wasn't the right style of football for the club. Obviously, an awful lot's changed since then. Parati's come in, and now Nuno's the guy. So, but I don't think, like, none of that's really Nuno's fault.
No, exactly. I think it's like, yeah, as you say, that's something I did a piece on last week. It's like, and the fact that he was, as you say, they decided he wasn't for them, and he was available for like the majority of this search. So obviously, if they wanted him, they could have had him. But one of the big things as well was Levy talking about in his program notes before the Villa game in May at the end of the season about, you know, wanting free-flowing, attacking football, Spurs DNA, should love Chaz and Dave, and all of this sort of stuff. And you're like, well, that's then just so at odds with Nuno, but that's not really his fault. You know, he's never claimed to be that. It was kind of, it just felt like a bit of a misselling. And I think, like James says, he's maybe not quite the kind of conservative manager that some have painted him as. I think he's more of a pragmatist. You know, and Mourinho is often described as a pragmatist, which I don't think is fair. Mourinho he has a philosophy. He believes the way to play, basically, whoever you have is, you know, without the focus on without the ball and let them make mistakes. I think Nuno's more malleable than that. So maybe we'll see with, you know, different players, better quality of players than what he had at Wolves. He might approach things a bit differently.
James, can you just sum up to what extent is the fan base in a position? Are you underwhelmed by Nuno, or is it kind of get behind the new manager positivity, or what? Can you just describe what the atmosphere is at the moment?
It kind of feels like it's a bit of both. I mean, it is hard not to feel a little bit underwhelmed by it, having kind of had all these other incredible options like wafted under our noses. You know, I mean, particularly Conte and Pochettino. Obviously, like, Pochettino has a massive emotional appeal there, and Conte, purely in sort of statistical terms, probably one of the most successful manager in European football or European club football in the last decade or slightly shorter. So, you know, once you've kind of heard those managers are realistic options, or sort of at least options that were being discussed at the club at a higher level, then yeah, it is a little bit underwhelming when you end up with a guy who, you know, and caveat of what we said before, but who's just finished 13th or whatever with Wolves in the previous season and then been effectively sacked at the end of the season. So yeah, it is a little bit underwhelming in that context. But like you say, you know, if it had been, you know, if he had come in off the back of Pochettino, maybe, you know, that might have felt a bit odd. But I don't think it would have felt underwhelming necessarily. It would have felt a bit different. But like you say, it would have felt like it was a bit more like they'd appointed like an up and coming manager rather than one who's coming off the back of his worst season in like 4 years at the club he was at.
Or even if they'd appointed him on May 24th, like the day after the season finished, you might not necessarily agree with it, but you'd be like, okay, fair enough. This is clearly the guy that the club wants, rather than having this like psychodrama play out in public where, you know, it's pretty clear he wasn't.
I mean, I think to be honest, the biggest issue that fans seem to have with this appointment is Jorge Mendes. And I think we can say fairly definitively that Mendes played quite a big role in the recruitment at Wolves over the last 4 or 5 years. And I would say probably for the most part, they felt the benefit of that rather than any kind of negative effect, given, you know, some of the players that ended up playing there, particularly like, you know, if you think of Neves playing for them in the Championship, which is absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You know, I don't think they would have had too many complaints about that up to that point. Whether or not Spurs are going to be signing that kind of player on the basis of that relationship remains to be seen. But it is certainly a cause for scepticism at the moment, because I don't think, you know, that should be the sole basis of Tottenham's recruitment policy.
I think when you break down the Spurs managerial process that led to the appointment of Nuno last week, you can basically break it down into two separate halves, and that was before Paratici came in effectively at the start of end of May, start of June. And then when Paratici came in, there was what you might as well call the Steve Hitchen phase and then the Paratici phase of the process. And so Nuno is very much Paratici's appointment, just as Gattuso would have been, and I think Fonseca arguably would have been, and Conte would have been. And it, as much as the managerial process has been the story over the last few weeks, we should not lose sight of the fact that Tottenham have undergone a very big restructure as part of this. Paratici's been brought in as managing director, football, which is actually quite difficult to say and even harder to write because it looks like you just don't know how to construct a sentence. But Paratici, it's a huge change for Spurs. Tottenham haven't had a Paratici type figure. I guess arguably you could say Baldini or Comolli or Arneson. But
David Pleat.
Yeah, Paratici's been given a lot of power, to oversee the football side. So it's a big change from how Spurs have been run for the last sort of 8 or so years. And he's going to be a hugely influential figure over the course of the next few seasons at the club, given how much power has been invested in him by Levy. And, we can argue about whether or not we think he's doing a good job, but what is unarguable is that this is a big change for Tottenham, which will have ramifications long beyond, the managerial tenure of Nuno. But Charlie, you've just written about Paratici. What's your general sense of the his skills, his reputation, and what he's going to do at Spurs?
Well, I mean, broadly positive, speaking to people about him and his time at Juve, certainly in those early years, because it's easy to forget. We think of Juve now as like, well, so what? What's doing a good job at Juve? They win the league every year. It's uncompetitive, etc., etc. But when he came in, Juve were off the back of a 7th place finish. They'd missed out in the Champions League many times in the previous few years. There had been Calciopoli. They weren't what they are now. They were then, I'd say, more like how we view, say, an AC Milan now, a kind of sleeping giant who kind of trade off former glories. And he was really important in turning that round, made some crucial hires like Conte. I mean, and Conte, again, was unproven at the time. Free signings like Pogba, obviously then sold for a huge profit, Pirlo. And even in the last few years, he started spending a lot more money. Obviously, Cristiano Ronaldo was the kind of headline signing from his time. But really, what he's remembered for more is those frees or signing players like Tevez for 7 million or Vidal for about 12, players that then went on to achieve great things. I mentioned there Ronaldo and Mendes. I mean, this is something that fans are concerned about, that they feel that the fact that he was putting forward Gattuso and then has hired Nuno is because of a coziness with Jorge Mendes. The sense I get is that they clearly have a good relationship and have done since the Ronaldo signing. It should be said, they only signed 2 Mendes clients while he was at Juve, and one was Cancelo, who they then sold for a huge profit. So, I don't think that's a kind of, you only did it because of Mendes signing. So I think it's important to have a bit of that balance. One thing that was interesting was that it said that his time when he was best at Juve was when he was working alongside Beppe Marotta, who is now at Inter Milan. And Marotta was in a kind of CEO role, which meant Paratici could focus almost exclusively on the recruitment side, the football side, not have to worry too much about the business side. And when Marotta went, it was seen that he kind of struggled a bit with the greater responsibility. So it will just be really interesting to see how that dynamic plays out at Tottenham, how much he will just have autonomy on the football side, how much he can leave the other things, delegate to other people. And what people I'm speaking to, people who deal with Tottenham are fascinated by is, what does this mean for Levy on the football side? They've become so used to Levy being so hands-on, being in lots of meetings about things like contract renewals. Now, is he going to be there, or is it just going to be Paratici? And I think something that fans have wanted for a long time is for Levy to cede control of the football side, because the perception is that's not his expertise. And that's the perception also of some people with, inside knowledge of these sorts of things. So it'd be really interesting to see how that plays out.
James, you look a bit skeptical.
No, it's just that Charlie's talked for so long that I now can't take the piss out of him for the way he said Jorge Mendes. Which just brought back memories
of sitting on that for like 7 minutes.
I was like, I'm going to jump in now. It just reminded me of the pronunciation of Paratici, which it isn't as I expected, which was of course Paratici. And I just thought it's just worth mentioning that now that we are pronouncing it right. This is how James Horncastle told us to pronounce
true.
it.
We just do what he says.
Unfortunately for him, the emphasis is on rat, I guess, which I don't know. Maybe if things don't work out, maybe something we come back to. But yeah, Paratici. It has been what I think you might call an inauspicious start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've not been especially convinced by the play to bring in Gattuso, who, you know, to be fair, which maybe more than he deserves, did a reasonably good job a good job at Napoli until the very end, and I think a pretty good job at Milan as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, the issues that he had in the background of the not too distant past, really, I think are things that maybe should have been at the forefront of minds rather than the back when they were having those initial conversations with him.
Yeah. Equally, what I would say, maybe this sounds like I'm defending Paratici on this, but Paratici is coming from a culture in Italy in which the political correctness of managers is not really as much of an issue as it is in the UK. And I imagine that Paratici is probably quite surprised that he could, you know, that a candidate who he would try and appoint for this managerial job should get out, you know, should collapse basically because of statements he's made. I'm certainly not saying that. I'm not saying that Paratici is right and that Gattuso is right and that the fans are wrong. You know, I think fans were entitled and right to take the stance they took, and I think the club was right to listen to them. But I guess it's just a kind of culture clash thing, really. Like Paratici just wouldn't necessarily expect this to be an issue when he was considering who he wanted as manager.
Yeah, it certainly should have been flagged internally, shouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it feels like quite a big misstep when you know, before he'd actually technically even started the job. It certainly put him on the back foot, I think, in the eyes of the fans. So we'll kind of have to see how we go. And, you know, obviously he's kind of under pressure from the off now. And as we know, it's a little bit of a squad rebuild, or quite a big squad rebuild that needs to be undertaken over this summer. And there'll be quite a lot of pressure on him now to kind of get his feet under the table immediately and do a few good deals. And the way fans feel about him, I guess, could be quite different by when does the transfer window close at the start of the season, or September? Whenever it is. Who knows? We're only journalists, who cares? So yeah, if he's done a few deals, then he gets in a couple of really good centre-backs that are going to improve the team, someone else in midfield, you know, a creative player who's going to get people excited, then fine. I think people will start... Unfortunately, people will kind of forget that issue, which obviously should be way more important than how good the football team is, really. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Because I kind of feel like, to be honest, if they don't start the season well, he's going to be under huge pressure really quickly.
Yeah.
And my honest feeling, and I know PSG have subsequently gone out and signed some really good players since all that Pochettino stuff was kicking off. But if PSG don't start well, I think Poch is going to be under massive pressure there. And I don't find it impossible to envisage him getting pinned by PSG in like November, and then suddenly, if Pochettino's available, then like Nuno is under huge pressure, and then if that all changes, then Paratici is going to be under huge pressure as well. So yeah, it's incredibly unfair. It is incredibly unfair, but that is going to be the way it's going to be now, and that's kind of what Nuno has unfortunately had to take on, because you know, there's all this skepticism abound, and not just about him, but about the higher ups at the club as well. And because he's the manager of the football team, and he's going to be the one there on the touchline every week, he's basically going to bear the brunt of it.
You're right that the transfer window is now huge for Paratici, and we've heard a lot about how you know, what a good deal maker he is, and he's a great negotiator and very well connected and everything. But I suppose this is going to be one of the big challenges now, is that it's not like, you know, you're not buying Cristiano Ronaldo for 80 million or getting Aaron Ramsey in on 300k a week or anything like that. You're having to play with much smaller sums. Spurs don't really have any money. You know, they've got the Juan Foyth money and then other money that they might be able to bring in from sales over the course of this summer. But frankly, it remains to be seen how much money they can actually generate. And this is reportedly one of Antonio Conte's concerns when he was speaking to the club, was it's not confident that they can generate as much money as they need to spend. So Paratici's going to have to be very clever. And I don't know whether that will mean we end up seeing free transfers or loans, or, you know, cheap, whether it's old players coming to the end of their contracts or taking punts on younger players. Or
that's what I think it'll be. Players with a year left, I think that'll be what they're looking at, I would imagine.
But this is, you touched on it there, Jack, one of the big things for him is not so much even the players he brings in, it's being able to shift a lot of these players. And that's one of the areas where Tottenham have been hit really hard by the pandemic, because they had a lot of saleable assets. You know, if we were talking a couple of years ago, all of a sudden now you're thinking, can we even get fees for a lot of these players? And as much as, you know, fans don't like being in, you know, having good relations with Jorge Mendes, Raiola and the rest, if they can help you shift some of that dead wood, then I don't think, you know, supporters will have too much of a problem with that. That's going to be one of the biggest things for him in this window. And I am interested to see if he does make those free, you know, because that's the thing, free transfers, like, it's a punt, but if you get it right, it can pay off massively. You know, you look at someone like Cavani last season, who I think at the time everyone was saying like, oh God, Cavani, classic, you know, just sign an Overhill player who's in it for the money, etc., etc. They can work out really well. And being the one who signs him, or a Pirlo, as Paratici did, lots of other players, you know, it's a gamble, but I wonder if we will see a bit of that.
I mean, have they maybe missed the boat on that now? Like, I feel like free transfers, normally that's kind of all lined up before. Yeah. I mean, I guess technically Messi is unattached. So maybe there's a deal to be done. I wouldn't get in the team, would he?
Hello, I'm David Ornstein, and I'm here to tell you what The Athletic has planned across its podcast network during the Euros. You can catch me alongside Mark Chapman and a range of other Athletic writers on The England Show throughout the tournament, bringing you the very latest news and insight from the England camp every single day. Prior to the big kickoff, we're releasing an 8-part documentary series telling the stories of the past 8 tournaments, starting with the sounds and smells of Euro 88 and finishing in 2016. There'll also be nightly episodes of the Totally Football Show, 9 zonal marking podcasts from Michael Cox's tactics and analytics team, and Adam Hurrey's Football Clichés will take a look at the competition's alternative storylines. So, with what felt like a never-ending domestic season finally behind us, we've got all of your Euro 2020 needs covered. Check out every show for free wherever you get your podcasts.